All right, thank you guys very much for joining me here early morning on the Wednesday here of reInvent, kind of coming to the home stretch. I feel it's like the home stretch with reInvent. My name is Tom Godden. I am an enterprise strategist with Amazon Web Services. Our enterprise strategy team is a team of 12 former chief information officers, chief technology officers, chief information security officers, chief financial officers from companies like Coca-Cola, McDonald's, Capital One, Airbus, NASA JPL. I was the chief information officer at Foundation Medicine. Foundation Medicine is the world's largest genomics company. And we spend a lot of time having conversations with customers around things like this and talking about multi-cloud and what it means to look into multi-cloud and how organizations should be considering it. And what we see is, well, you know, multi-cloud is a key decision for many different organizations. It's something that many of you will be faced with along your cloud journey. And as an enterprise strategist, it comes up in many conversations that I have with customers. But you see, customers are bombarded with a lot of conflicting messaging about do multi-cloud, don't do multi-cloud. Make sure you do multi-cloud in a very specific way. And what I'm going to try to do today is share with you the perspective that we've gleaned from the thousands of customers that we as an enterprise strategy team have talked to on this topic and share a perspective of what we see organizations doing well and why and where we might see them struggling a little bit to help try to provide you a little bit of clarity on this. You see, you know, you might go, well, you know, is multi-cloud right for me? It's a challenge. It's a nuanced conversation. You know, it has a lot of question on whether or not it's ultimately the right strategy for you, and it's not so straightforward, although I'll try to make it a little bit more straightforward here over the next hour. But I will say, by and large, as our experience as an enterprise strategy team and my experience as a former chief information officer, writ large, we believe that the best strategy is for you to identify a primary principled cloud provider, to move your workloads to that, to master the capabilities within that provider, and to drive cost and risk out and to be able to leverage capabilities of that. But there are a variety of reasons why you might consider a multi-cloud strategy. There are some good reasons why you might consider and look at this. But let's start for a minute and define what we mean by multi-cloud. I talked a lot to customers, and they all have various different well-intended definitions. But for the purpose of our conversation here today, let's define multi-cloud and say it doesn't mean when you're using a software as a service product. Your favorite email solution or project management solution or CRM solution might, in fact, be a software as a service, and it might, in fact, be hosted on someone's cloud. Set that to the side. What we're talking about is your primary cloud, your principal cloud solution, you know, where you have more than one cloud service provider, where you're putting workloads onto that cloud service provider. That's what we mean when we talk about multi-cloud. It's not the software as a service types of solution. So through our multiple engagements with customers, as I mentioned, we've come up with several best practices. And I want to take you through these 8 best practices that we see. And the first one is, and it sounds a little bit obvious, but it's an important one, because you'd be surprised, maybe you wouldn't, by the number of times I engage with customers on this, but we miss this point. The first one is pursue multi-cloud only to fulfill business reasons. You know, we see common reasons for multi-cloud. It can be created oftentimes through, well, a merger and acquisition. I see this one happening a lot. You're all in on one cloud service provider, everything's going really well. Guess what? You buy a company and they're on another cloud provider. Welcome to multi-cloud. Congratulations. You know, what happens next isn't so easy. The engineer inside me says, well, let's clean that up and move it all to one, and you know, one's better than others. Guys, the sum total number of times in my life as a CIO when we acquired a company that I got to clean up the technical debt and consolidate it down is 0, and I suspect you guys are in the same situation. Right, so we need to find a way. How do we operate within that when we get thrust into this, you know, type of thing? You know, I advise you, as you look at that as that M&A strategy, have that strategy be part of how you evaluate this and go into it eyes wide open. You know, another one that we ultimately see is a desire to leverage differentiated capabilities. This is a tough one. It's the shiny object on the floor. It's that great press release from another customer where you're like, oh, I kind of want to go use that. So, well, okay. long-term differentiated capabilities of another cloud service provider. Make sure you're going for something that is unique and differentiated that will sustain over the long term. This sounds like a good idea. It sounds like best of breed and it sounds all good, but in practicality, this one's really hard to pull off and to do it effectively. And I'll give you some ideas on how to do this. We advise for people to really follow this 80-20 type of rule by doing this, where you select that primary cloud provider and put the majority of your workloads on that primary cloud provider and only have a small amount of workloads on that other provider. You see, the challenge is once we start to spread workloads across this, we need people to manage those workloads across it. And you know what? It's hard to find the 4-foot-tall left-handed pink unicorns. There's not as many of them as you would think, and to find those people who can work across clouds is really challenging, and it really, will prevent you from being able to leverage these things. But, go into it because there's that good reason for how you execute on it. Another one that we see, and this one to me is multi-cloud with an asterisk. It's when you have a line of business, you have a large corporate entity, and that large corporate entity might have a primary cloud strategy, but one of their individual lines of business might be on another cloud service provider. All right, I guess, at the corporate level, you're multi-cloud because you have more than one. But a lot of the challenges that we see with multi-cloud, how do you operate it? How do you secure it? How do you staff your people? How do you do all these things? They kind of go away because that line of business is doing its own thing over here. So you are losing some advantage, potentially, on scale of your resource commit and your financial capabilities on it. But by and large, you've bypassed a lot of the other struggles that we see with multi-cloud. It's not an absolute when we look at these things. So my recommendation, though, is to be clear on the why. Go into multi-cloud for a reason. And make sure that that reason is grounded in business value. Don't do it because all the cool kids are doing it. We'll get to that later. Do it because it addresses one of these business needs. Do it because of that long-term differentiation. Do it because merger and acquisition brought it to you. Do it because part of your corporate strategy with your large corporation, it's okay for that independent line of business to be able to access and to go after that. Make sure that you have that firm guardrails. Those decisions and that reason for why is important for your staff. As they go through and they make decisions of, well, should I go left or should I go right? If you have declared that why, we're going to multi-cloud to take advantage of this opportunity, it can help guide them on what they do and why they do things and why they put workloads where they put them. Otherwise, what I've seen happen in a lot of cases, when people don't have a firm why, you get a lot of sprawl. You get a lot of chaos in this. The second one is to be mindful of multi-cloud myths. And let me go through a couple different myths that we ultimately see. The first one that we see a lot of people saying is, well, everyone's doing multi-cloud. I'm sure you've heard this one as well. For the past several years, multiple advisory companies have come out and reported that the majority of Global 1,000 companies are doing multi-cloud. As a CIO, I used to get this question all the time. Industry analysts would call you and go, Tom, are you considering a multi-cloud strategy? And I'd go, yeah. Why wouldn't I? I'm considering it. It doesn't mean I'm doing it. It doesn't mean I'm putting real, but they mark you down in the box as the ones who are considering it. Flexera has a report in 2023 State of the Cloud that 87% of enterprises have a multi-cloud strategy. The facts bear out my experience in engaging with lots of customers that just is not actually the case. A study from Bain is what we see much more occurring. Bain did a study where they said 71% of companies they interviewed had a primary cloud strategy. 29% had a multi-cloud strategy. But what's even more interesting is within that 29%, 95% of the customers had the vast majority of their workloads still on one primary cloud provider. So even when they were multi-cloud, it was like, I'm multi-cloud, and this little thingy over here is running in another one. So we don't see this. We see a lot of energy and a lot of discussion around this and a lot of confusion around it, but we don't see the facts bearing out that actually everyone is in fact doing multi-cloud. Our recommendation is, again, to be clear on why you're considering multi-cloud and make sure that that reason is driven out of business need. Another one that I hear and I talk to customers about is multi-cloud will help you avoid lock-in. It sounds like a good idea. Why wouldn't you want optionality and choice? We want to be able to make a decision and to have that optionality and that control, that belief that you're getting vendor stability by it, and that you're no longer beholden to that single cloud service provider. It seems on paper like it actually makes a lot of sense, but if we look at this matrices here, and we look at lock-in and other different aspects of our life, and we have the uniqueness of the utility and the switching costs on this 4x4 matrix, you could plot things and go, okay, your plug-in charger for your phone. It's not a very unique utility, but it's easy for me to swap and change what I do. In the top right corner, you have different mobile platforms. Ooh, okay, I'm getting a lot of value out of it, but my switching costs, once you get brought into the ecosystem of your favorite mobile provider, it's hard to decide to leave. All your friends are on that provider. You can chat, you can video interface with all of them. As we get to switching your cell phone provider, turns out it's relatively easy and maybe a good thing to do from time to time. But we get into that bottom right, and these are really the unicorns that you get down here, where it's very unique, but the switching costs are low. You kind of wonder, well, how unique it is. And really, as we look at this, this really helps us understand. We often are okay to have a higher switching cost when we're getting value for that switching costs. And we need to look at the cloud as ultimately the same thing. The other challenge that we get when we say, okay, I want to have the ability to switch and be fungible and move workloads is, oh, I'm going to build an abstraction layer. Oh, geez. Okay. It's one of my, when I hear people say they're going to build an abstraction layer, I'm like, oh, please don't. You're going to become an expert in abstraction layers, but not an expert in anything that's going to matter is value and differentiation for your company. Not only do abstraction layers actually force you to a lowest common denominator, which I then ask, why did you go to cloud in the first place? If you're not going to leverage the higher level services and capabilities, advanced analytics, advanced machine learning, and on and on and on. But also, abstraction layers, they don't solve all of the issues. They only solve for a small portion of it. They don't solve for, data. They don't solve for, management tools. They don't solve for security practices. They solve a very small segment of the problem. Our recommendation is, again, multi-cloud does mean trade-offs. Pre-cloud, you ran on-premise, and these were big and long and drawn-out decisions. They were one-way door decisions, as we say at Amazon, that you make a commitment and you have to stick with it. But I recommend that you understand what your switching costs are to move from one provider of another, if that's important to you, and to go through and define what that approach would be to move those workloads. What would it take to move those workloads? Have an understanding of it. Have an exit strategy and a plan, if that's what's important to you. And then determine what the cost would be to be able to execute upon that approach. The reality is, as I mentioned, those switching costs are a reality in this, but create the model on how to manage it. The third one, multi-cloud improves availability. By and large, what I've seen when organizations have pursued multi-cloud under the belief that it creates higher availability is, in fact, they introduce risk within their organization that reduces their availability. In the early days of multi-cloud, people rushed to this and said to this, because again, on paper, on first blush, you go, gosh, this makes sense. Yeah, why wouldn't I want that? If this one has a problem, I'm just going to move my workloads over to this one and everything will be fine. Again, you assume you have portability of workloads, equality of workloads, and that somehow you're building an active-active solution between two different cloud service providers that seamlessly will work with 100% replication, so if there's an issue, that it operates. There's a great quote from Lydia Leong here, an analyst with Gartner on this, that multi-cloud failover is complex and costly to the point of being nearly almost impractical. I couldn't have said it a better way. It sounds, again, like good on paper, but in practicality, the complexities of trying to achieve this really don't bear out, when in fact, by large, you can get a significant amount of failover capability by using not only the availability zones, within AWS, but a multi-region strategy if that's what's important to you. To be able to get that resilience and that capability. You know, we see ultimately that that increases this risk, as we talked about. It assumes this hypothesis that you can fail over from one environment to another. When, you know, again, in reality, AWS has an unmatched availability and performance within this. You know, the other challenge that this has when you start to look at this failover is it requires multiples of everything. I need to have everything set up in one provider. I need to have everything set up in another provider. And all of this is increasing cost and complexity as we go ahead and do this. It also adds security and compliance challenges. You know, when you start to need to comply with the right to be forgotten from GDPR, and now I have 2 environments, now it's even harder. When I have my auditors come in and audit me, you know, to be able to explore whether or not you're, you know, doing things to a regulatory standard, now you have 2 environments. Everything just became more complicated. It became harder to be able to successfully operate in this type of environment and to deploy security policies consistently across your organization, to be able to get that resiliency, to be able to get that privacy, that security type of capabilities. We've amplified that under the belief that this was the way to ensure higher availability. When in fact, again, by large, as I've worked with many organizations, and I've worked with organizations that have set out determined on this strategy that they're going to do this. And almost all of them, after a few months of going into this, come back and say, in fact, this is not going to solve our problem. That there are better ways to solve this problem. So our recommendation is target an application or a workload for a single cloud. Architect it to use multiple regions and availability zones, and understand it, master it, take out the risk, lather, rinse, repeat. Drive the risk out by understanding this platform and this capability. Leverage the capabilities within AWS. You will be by far more resilient than if you pursue a multi-cloud strategy. And that takes me to my 4th one. Multi-cloud provides pricing advantage. You know, the old way that we did it, the old way that I did it, long, drawn out RFPs, big procurement, you know, activities, you know, most IT services were driven by procurement. You know, the idea was that you'd get competition between providers and I'd have them go into a bake-off and fight to the bottom, when in fact, that's not how things operate in cloud. You see, you know, when you're operating in a primary cloud provider, it is more effective because you only incur the costs once. With a multi-cloud strategy, I have not only the core cost for that first cloud, but I will also, in all likelihood, need to incur those costs again. But I'm also more likely to be inefficient because it's harder to master both. I work with organizations all the time, talking to them about a FinOps practice and how to drive cost out of their organization. And they think, oh, if I can negotiate a better contract with AWS, I'll save money. Yeah, probably go for it, please. We're all for that. We're trying to drive costs down ourselves. By far, the best way that you can drive costs out of your organization is to understand what you're spending, establish a FinOps practice, and drive the costs out yourself. And when you have 2 clouds, you got double the costs and more complexity, and it's hard to master and to drive those costs out. And therefore, by large, your costs are in fact likely to be higher. When you put more workloads onto that single cloud, that primary cloud provider, you can get those higher volume discounts. You can master that. You can understand how to drive those costs out. And you can take advantage of the fact that AWS has reduced our prices 129 times since we launched, and we will continue to do so. By far, it is the better strategy. The third one that I talk to organizations about is to have a clear strategy and governance to support. We talked briefly earlier a little bit about the why. You know, you need to have a clear strategy. You need to say, we are doing this and here's why. We're going to put the majority of our workloads on one cloud provider, on a primary cloud provider. And maybe these specific workloads, because they had long-term differentiated capability, are going to go on another cloud. Maybe you bought another company that's on another cloud, but establish the rules that says only these things are going to go onto this other cloud. And here's why. Don't leave it up to your developers to make the decision. They're well-intended people, but trust me, you know what they're going to do? Human nature, it's going to sprawl. You're going to wind up with things everywhere, and then you're going to step back and go, why is this more complicated? Why is this more costly? Why is it harder to manage regulation? Because you introduced variance into the system. So our strategy, define a clear change management process, create a detailed map of what goes where and why, and continuously review this strategy to make sure that it is achieving benefits. As part of that, you need to have tools that can help you simplify and manage this infrastructure. AWS System Manager allows customers to manage and update and patch servers on virtual machines, not only on AWS, but on premises and in other clouds. AWS Config allows you to do the same thing, that centralized management, where you can manage the VMs on-premise in AWS, but you can also manage that on other cloud providers to get to that single tool when you need to have that multi-cloud strategy to be able to gain control over what this is. Rackspace is a customer of ours, that is a large consulting partner that spends a lot of time in this space, and they had a challenge where they were seeking a single solution to help patch and manage servers and virtual machines across their on-premises environment as well as AWS, and they use AWS System Manager to do this. Another customer of ours, Deutsche Börse, which is a financial trading company, had a problem and a challenge where previously they ran all their data centers and did all of the monitoring and configuration with a custom-built solution, and then they deployed AWS Config to not only continuously monitor and record the inventory of configuration, but they're doing that, again, on-premises, across clouds, and across AWS. We have a variety of solutions that we are able to extend that helps people, whether they're managing in a hybrid environment or other clouds. You can use CloudWatch or maybe AWS or Amazon OpenSearch to set alarms to be able to log metrics across various workloads and virtual machines and containers across multiple environments. You can also utilize things like Amazon Managed Service for Prometheus to create and explore, create those observability dashboards, or AWS Distro for open telemetry. It allows you to instrument your applications once and reduce that technical debt across any different environment. Now, one of the things when you get down to that business reason why, remember we started with that business reason for why, make sure that you're looking at this and doing your best, if not absolutely doing it, to deploy and make sure that you have not spread contiguous workloads across cloud service providers. And what I mean by that is, you get latency when you break things apart. Not only do we have latency, but we have increased complexity. When you take an example like this, and if I went with this order-to-cash model, and I do a few steps in one cloud service provider, and then I have another steps of the same business process in another one, and then I come back into the other cloud service provider. It's harder to secure. It's harder to deploy for DevOps. Feel free to push that into production. Is it all possible? Sure, it's possible, but what value are we getting? I mean, is the juice worth the squeeze at this point? It's harder to do. When it breaks, you have an issue in production, now you're like, okay, where'd it break? What's the problem? Was it this security policy in this cloud, or the security policy in that one, or was it the network configuration in this one, or the network, remember, and system's down. Now again, if the juice is worth the squeeze, if the why is worth it, maybe. But go into it and try to deploy those contiguous workloads. Our recommendation is applications should be contiguous. They should be discrete. They should be self-contained within an individual cloud and not broken up across individual clouds. The fifth one is a little bit of a sister to this, which is applications should remain with their transactional data. Distributed workloads, again, can lead to increased cost, and compliance becomes harder. Again, that GDPR, please, that right to be forgotten, but now that you've spread your workloads out, now I'm chasing that data everywhere across my environment. Our recommendation on this is to simplify, to co-locate, to put your storage as close to the application as possible. I worked with a customer who, for a while, had a strategy to put all their databases in one cloud service provider and all their applications in another. I mean, we remember the movie Jurassic Park. We were so excited, with the fact of whether or not we could do it. We never stopped to ask the question whether or not we should do it. I mean, can you do it? Yeah, technically you can. Does it look great on an architectural diagram? Sure. Data's over here in this cloud, and applications over here in this one, and the architects all feel warm and happy. It looks all pretty. But the practicality of it is why? Why did we do this? Was there the value in doing this? Keep the application data closer to those. Consider whether or not they will be consumed locally on it. But I know you guys are all thinking, as we look at this, make sure that we have the data as close to the application. It's crucial for high-performance applications. But I know you're all thinking as we do this, as we look at our recommendations, continuously monitor those data access patterns for latency and how we structure those. Make sure we're looking continuously at how the applications are deployed. Your architectures are living, breathing systems, so make sure you're doing this and establish data classification and handling and retention policies across these clouds. We can help with a variety of different solutions on this. AWS Data Sync will help you move data across clouds when you get into a scenario where you need to move data across those. Amazon Athena will allow you to do querying and surface insights from data stored in multiple different clouds, including AWS and on-premises. So you can use these tools when you have needed to spread the data out for good reason, to be able to access and to read it. But again, I know what you're asking, well, what about data lakes? One of the things that I see organizations doing, and if I'm honest, it's my first impulse as well, which is we are going to build a really, really big single data lake. Because why not? Sounds like a good idea. And we're going to put that data lake over here in this cloud. And all the applications that feed it are going to be over here in this cloud. Again, the architects love this. It's a beautiful diagram. Okay, feel free to pay the egress costs to move all your data to do that. Often what we see is that people are better served by having multiple data lakes. That you don't always need the one single data lake to rule them all. That you might have some data for your warehouse information. You might have some data for your sales information. You might have some data for other various different things within manufacturing. Some of that data is going to have to cross-pollinate, but not all of that data. So you can keep that data closer to the transactional applications. You're also going to find that there are scenarios where you have purpose-built data lakes that do things better than that one large single data lake that might exist. Things like the AWS supply chain, AWS clean rooms, or we get into AWS Health Lake, are small purpose-built data lakes that allow you to put that information closer to that transactional data. Another one that I hear all the time from people is, well, we're just going to containerize everything. Okay, all right, here's another one. Okay, I mean, first of all, please do containers. I like them. 2 thumbs up. But we need to realize that containers don't solve all of the problems that we have. They don't solve for all of the differentiators that exist within our organizations. Have a plan. Use containers. But understand that they don't solve for the policies you have within your organization, all the different database types and ways that you store data. The object storage that you have in this provider behaves a little bit different from the object storage here. The vector database here is different than the vector database. Containers don't solve for all of these things. They don't solve for the network configuration. They don't solve for the governance. They don't solve for the tools that help operate. So congratulations. Yes, use containers because they're good. And sure, containers might make portability across multi-cloud better, but they're going to make it 7.32% better. I don't know what the number is, but the point is they're not going to make it 100% better. They're not going to solve the entire problem. So go into it with your eyes wide open. Have the plan, use containers, but understand their limitations in helping you address and solve this problem. We have a variety of different tools and capabilities that allow you to manage this, whether it's Amazon Elastic Kubernetes service, or we get into our container service, allows you to deploy and manage these instances with a variety of our tools. EKS Anywhere and ECS Anywhere allows you to manage deployment of your Kubernetes. EKS distro allows companies to deploy these on AWS, on-premises, and yes, within other clouds. And our Amazon EKS console provides a single location for when you need to do this, that you can view those across multiple environments. Another thing that we got to, and we talked about this earlier on, those 4-foot-tall left-handed pink unicorns that we have. One of the things that I see people do is go, okay, I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to move into multi-cloud. Good, because we have a good business reason to do it. Thumbs up, solid move. But I'm going to build one team that's for Cloud 1, the Cloud Center of Excellence, and I'm going to build another team for Cloud 2, Cloud Center of Excellence. And on one hand, that makes sense, because it's hard to find someone who's probably good at multiple clouds. They're very few and far between. And candidly, not sure I believe that they're actually good in both. They're probably really good in one and acceptable in the other. I'm looking for really good. I don't know about you guys. I want really good. Okay? But the mistake that we see people make in this is due to that broader scope and that complexity, we start to get variance and difference. Remember, we were talking about it before, you're going to have to deal with your regulatory, the fact that I need common policies. If you were trying to do this because you thought you'd move workloads somewhere, I can't allow for the variance. I need the consistency. So our recommendation on this is to have that still single Cloud Center of Excellence. Specialize within that Cloud Center of Excellence around the specific skills and tools and mechanisms that are particular to that cloud service provider. Develop a consistent governance framework for why and what goes where, and stay informed by coming to reInvent to the advancements and the changes in that individual cloud service provider. Stay up to speed on those and develop that rigor and that structure around that. And this leads us to the 8th one. Now, when I built the deck, the CISO on my team went, 8? Really? Put security 8? The answer is, yeah, I put security 8. But security to us is always priority number 1. I realize this is number 8 in my slide deck, but please, it's number 1. We need to make sure that security remains a top priority. And with multi-cloud, the simple fact is security becomes harder. There's multiple security models. Areas such as identity management, network security, asset management, audit logging become more complicated because I have just simply 2 of them. Although not unique to multi-cloud, we recommend a couple different things when it comes to this. Shift your security left by automating and embedding it into your delivery pipelines, into your DevOps pipelines. Strive for that single pane of glass. We can help with that. Remember AWS Config and AWS Systems Manager. But use tools specific to that cloud to help you manage and get visibility to security. The specific tool will provide you better insights, and develop and enforce consistent security policies and practices through that single Cloud Center of Excellence that we just talked about. And use things like AWS IAM to be able to have a consistent way to manage your IAM, your identities across these multiple cloud environments. You know, we have a variety of different tools. Security Lake is a way for you to pull all of that information across multiple cloud environments, AWS and on-prem, into that single pane of glass. That AWS IAM Identity Center allows you to provision and manage identities across multiple environments, as well as that AWS IAM Roles Manager. Leverage those tools. You see, at the end of the day, our hypothesis as a team is that a leader's job is to, well, do a lot of things. It's to reduce cost, risk, and complexity, but to also be able to build an organization that is reliable and scalable and has high availability, and to do that all while increasing speed, innovation, and value. Other than that, it's a relatively easy job. It's a balancing act, and the question is, what is the most efficient and least complex way to sustain and achieve all those goals? And I hope you have understood, as you go through this and you look at this, we believe firmly, for most organizations, a primary cloud strategy provides the most value through its simplicity, through its focus, and through risk mitigation, allowing customers to deepen the ability to leverage differentiating capabilities within that cloud service provider. It optimizes an organization's ability to be able to take advantage of those capabilities, to truly stand out and to ultimately differentiate, and to be able to do what you should be doing, to do this because, remember, we started with this, because it creates business value, Not because all the cool kids you believe are doing it, not because of all these reasons. Do it because it is grounded in the why and in the value. You should not expend time and energy and money trying to avoid that hypothetical future problem you believe might happen in exchange for guaranteed increased risk, complexity, and increased maintenance costs. We believe that ultimately the juice is not worth the squeeze on this. AWS can help with a lot of different things. I've talked to you about several different tools that we have. We have a website here that will guide you on a variety of different tools and use cases on hybrid and multi-cloud that you can check out. Again, these are the myths that we talked about. We talked about the common reasons people go to multi-cloud. Make sure if you do it that you're grounded in one of these common reasons, that you're driven because of maybe a mergers and acquisition, that you're doing it for long-term differentiated capabilities, that you're doing it maybe because you're operating as a line of business. But then make sure you're not pursuing the myths. Make sure we're not listening to all the hype out there where we're saying everyone's doing multi-cloud. They're in fact not. Everyone is doing multi-cloud. People are, absolutely, they are absolutely, but it's not everyone is doing it. Don't do it because you believe that you're going to avoid lock-in. The risk and the complexity that you find are not going to, in all likelihood, we believe, be worth the perceived ability to avoid that lock-in. Don't do it because you believe that you're going to increase availability and reduce your risk. In fact, what I've seen by and large across industry, globally, small organizations, large enterprises, is that multi-cloud ultimately increases risk and companies step back away from it when they believe that they went to it for that reason. And don't do it because you believe you're going to get pricing advantage. Understand your cloud service provider, master it, and drive costs out. That's how to get cost efficiency on an individual cloud. But when you have that need, when you've risen to the occasion, when we bypass the hype and we find it for the business reason, make sure that we're following those best practices. Have that clear strategy. This goes here, those are the rules. We're not going to allow for sprawl. Have a reason, have the governance on why you're going to do it. Deploy those contiguous self-contained workloads. Put data with your applications and don't spread it out. Utilize containers. They're cool. Love them. Use them. But realize they're only going to solve a small percentage of our problem here. Go into it with your eyes wide open. Have that single cloud center of excellence. Specialize within. Specialize with the tools. Have your teams become experts in it. But do it in a coordinated manner. And keep security as a top priority. Leverage tools like AWS Security Lake to be able to get you that single pane of glass and that visibility across things, but leverage the specific tools of those individual cloud service providers to be able to master this and to be able to do this. We have a variety of resources for our team. We publish a lot of this information on Exec Insights on the AWS website. We have a training channel. We also write in a lot of information on our Enterprise Strategy blog. I have a lengthy blog on this multi-cloud topic on this. This is also all of my contact information. I am more than happy to continue the dialogue with you guys on this if we can help continue to shed more further experience and insights on this.